this. Okay, so I'll kick it off. And if you don't know me, my name's Alyssa. I'm the founder of Pretty Young and Motivated. I founded it back in 2016 when I was in college. And now it's become so much more than I thought it would. And I'm so excited to be able to connect with women like Dr. Jenny and have them share the information that they have. And I got this idea because I have quit birth control twice now. So I did about a year ago, just over a year ago. And I came to that decision because I was having a lot of different symptoms, and I would go to the doctor and they would be like, well, let's switch your birth control. You can try these different methods. There's this thing you can do. And then I just started doing my own research just because I didn't like the answers I was getting. And that led me to all sorts of different things, that birth control had some bad side effects and can cause anxiety, depression. I didn't feel like myself. So I quit for about 8 months, and then I got back on it, being that I was in a relationship. But then I read the book Beyond the Pill, and that taught me so much about my body that I had never known. And I learned that the one thing that I always sticks out to me is that my fertility window, or I guess when you are ovulating, is actually only one day. Technically, Jenny will go over that more. But I feel like we're told like all the time that you can get pregnant all the time. And that was like my biggest anxiety of everything. And so I just started to learn that there's really a gap for women in knowing their bodies and having access to this information. So I feel like we've sexualized sex education, but it doesn't have to just be about sex. It can be about just empowering yourself to make the right decisions for your body, whether that's being on birth control, being off birth control, what's going on in your body as far as your period. Is it normal that's happening? Is it not normal? And just really being curious to ask those questions and do the research. And I don't feel like we're always provided that information as women, or if we do like a Google search and then we're like, wait, I have ovarian cancer. And, hopefully it's not that case, but I feel like we always get the worst thing when you do that. So I started going to Dr. Jenny, who's a naturopathic doctor, and I've had a few appointments with her. And, I've been sharing some about that on PYM. And I just presented this idea to her because I loved her style of teaching me and being a little bit informal. But I love that because I feel like you go to the doctor and they're so quick to just put a band-aid on something and get you out of there. And I sat in her office and talked to her for about 2 hours. So I love the connection that we made, and I'm excited to have her join us today and provide this information for you. So, oh, here's my first time too. Dr. Jenny. Yeah, she's gonna take
Hey.
the
So the lighting is not as good in my office as it is in this photo, but I promise it's me. I have a little bit of a cold as well, so if I'm sniffling and making weird noises, I do apologize, but I'm gonna push through. So I am a naturopathic doctor. I love to focus on women's health, specifically hormones. Uh, Men don't come to the doctor, so it's easier to specialize in women's health, in my opinion. I have gone through my own struggles with hormonal birth control and just ran through the ringer of a lot of hormonal imbalances and other symptoms. And it wasn't really until med school that I learned about my own body, which, to be honest, is kind of crazy that I had to go to med school to learn about my period and about my body. So I want to break that down. I want that to be more accessible through my Instagram and through my patients, and then potentially, hopefully, more stuff like this in the future. So I was really happy that Alyssa asked me to join. And I know it's a little bit of a smaller group tonight. So if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them, or drop them in the chat. Or if you want to do so anonymously, maybe there's a way for you to do that. I'm not exactly sure, but there probably is.
messages. Well, uh, yeah, I guess I was gonna say message me on Instagram, but I guess I'll keep your secret if you message me. But
Yeah, absolutely. So that's me. That's what I do. My passions are women's health and hormones specifically, and I really love the work that I do, and I'm really happy that it led me to be able to do something like this. So happy.
great. Yeah, and I'm excited to have you on. So thank you for being here and sharing this.
Of course. Okay, so today we're going to kind of break down a lot of big topics that I no, you don't need as much in-depth information on that I have, but I will try my best to sort out what is important versus what's not important. If I get on a tangent, just like rein me back in, because I could talk about this stuff for days. Just because, like I said, it took me until I went to med school to learn about my body, and now I'm so passionate about other women learning about this as well. So this is kind of an outline on what we'll talk about. We'll talk about the different parts of the menstrual cycle, periods, why we have them, what's normal versus not normal. I'll go over a little bit of basic anatomy because I'm treating this as if you guys know nothing about your bodies. That's nothing to insult your intelligence. I'm sure you're all wonderful, intelligent beings, but there's a lot of stuff we're not taught about our own bodies. So I'll start with the basics, and then we'll talk about ovulation, some terminology as far as your cycle, PMS, what your periods say about your overall health, and then I'll talk about tracking your periods and why I think that's really important. Also, there's a lot of really cute gifs of uteruses out there, cute little cartoons in case you haven't seen them. So I picked this one. So I'll have some just very basic images for you ladies, and I'll just kind of roll from there. I didn't really want to bog it down with a lot of text. So if you need me to re-clarify anything, or if you have any questions, feel free to drop them. All right, go to the next one. Okay, so it was honestly really hard for me to find a picture of the female reproductive tract. Like, how stupid is that? I could find a picture of a cat's reproductive tract more than I could find a human female. So that just got me all fired up. So I found this one, which, if you ask me, this is a very weird shaped human, but whatever. So we'll go through some basic anatomy, and I think this is important as baseline knowledge because then we can move from there. So you're looking at the pelvis of a human female, so right around your hips, and behind your bladder, right about where your belly button sits, we have our uterus. So our uterus is made up of muscular tissue, and that's why when you get a cramp, it feels so awful because it's basically a giant muscle, and it can contract and squeeze like nobody's business when it gets angry. So your uterus is right there in the middle. Also a baby hotel, if that is where you decide to create a human, that's where they hang out. And on either side, we have these like angry looking horn things coming off, which are your fallopian tubes or your oviducts. That is where, if an egg decides to get fertilized around ovulation, that's where that happens. So connected to this fallopian tube, we have our ovaries, two little sacs that hang out on the edge of your fallopian tubes where we mature an egg or a follicle to be able to be ovulated around the middle of our cycle to then get fertilized by a sperm if that happens. At the end of your uterus, the opening of your uterus, you have your cervix, which is essentially a little hat for your uterus. There's a very small hole in there that it can expand a lot, enough for a baby head to fit through. And if you've ever gone to the OB/GYN and they had to dilate it, it's very painful because it doesn't want to be opened unless there's a baby coming out of it. So the inside of this uterus is what you shed during your period. It's called the inner lining of your uterus, your endometrium, whatever you want to call it. And then from the cervix, this little hat on our uterus, we open into the vagina, which I want to get this out there. I want to clarify this. Your vagina is internal. That is it. It's this little canal here. I don't know if you guys can see my pointer, but you probably can't. There we go. The vagina is just the birth canal or the canal leading up to your uterus. It has nothing else to do with the rest of the female reproductive tract. The word vagina has become synonymous with all of female genitalia, and that's just not correct. So the vagina is the internal portion. The external portion of the female genitalia is your vulva. This is a very important distinction because we just throw out the word vagina like it's the entire thing, and that's just not accurate. Sex ed is only required to be medically accurate in 19 of 50 US states. What? So that's probably why we don't know these things. But it's important. I think it's really important to know the things about your body. You, and if you know the terms and what things are, you can know if something's wrong. So vagina, internal. Vulva is external. Making up the vulva, we have the two different types of labia or lips, the inner and outer. We have the clitoris. We have the opening of the vagina and the urethra where urine comes out. I didn't want to put a picture of that because I couldn't find a good one, to be honest with you. But a quick Google search will lead you to a very fun image. So those are all of the basic parts of female reproductive anatomy. Can't clarify enough that vagina is internal, vulva is external. If you watch Goop, there's a whole episode about this, which is really fun and very entertaining if you need something to watch tonight.
I think I've seen that one.
It's great.
Yeah.
So you can skip to the next one.
Okay. Yeah, if you guys haven't watched the Goop Lab, off topic, but is that what you're referring to, right?
Yep.
Yeah. It's on Netflix, I believe. It's actually a really good series.
Yeah. They're not all super medically accurate, but that one's pretty funny. Also, Betty Ross is like, or Betty Dodson, sorry, is like a total badass. Sorry, wish I could swear on here.
I think badass is okay.
Okay. So you guys should watch that episode.
Yes.
Yes. Anyways, this is a quick little diagram, which I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but it is by Jolene Brighton. She's the one who wrote Beyond the Pill. She's a naturopathic doctor as well, and she has amazing resources for females. Her website is like goals. Like if I could have a website full of educational material, I would want it to be like hers. If you need any information, instead of Dr. Googling, thinking you have ovarian cancer or something crazy, head to her website first. She has so many different articles on so many different topics. Her Instagram is full of really great information. So I definitely direct people there. But what this graphic is supposed to do is to show you that there are several different phases of your menstrual cycle. So the word cycle entails from day one, so the day that you start bleeding, all the way up until the next day one. So all the way up until the next first time that you bleed. So a cycle is not the same as a period. And I find that that's often confused because when I ask a woman about her period, she starts talking about her cycle. Or when I ask her about her cycle, she starts talking about her period. So your period is from day one of you bleeding until the end of you bleeding. Your cycle is from day one of you bleeding all the way up until that next first day that you start bleeding. And it has a lot of stuff happening in between. So you can see on this little pie chart, I guess you want to call it, on the top left, you have the menstruation phase of your cycle, which is when you have your period and you bleed. This is when estrogen and progesterone, are two major female hormones, are both pretty low. And I won't go too far into hormones today. Probably save that for another day just because it's a lot of information. But we have estrogen and progesterone rather low at that time, and then they pick up during different times of your cycle. So this is when the inside lining of your uterus, your baby hotel, that's when you change the sheets, you get rid of everything, and you create vacancy for another potential pregnancy. So essentially the purpose of having a period is getting rid of that inner lining of your uterus, shedding the tissue and the blood that has been hanging out there, and getting ready for another ovulation and potential pregnancy. So we have menstruation, or the bleeding phase, and then we have what's called our proliferative phase. And these words are used to describe the actual uterine cycle. And we also have an ovarian cycle. So it gets a little bogged down with technical terms, but we have our uterine phases, so menstruation, then proliferative, which is when we start building up tissues, we start building up blood vessels, and then we have our secretory phase, which keeps building up the lining of the uterus, keeps building up the blood vessels in there to supply the tissue, and hopefully have a fertilized embryo implant. If it doesn't, then we go back to square one and we bleed all over again. So I'll describe this a little bit better in the next graphic, but I think this is important to know that we have three different phases: menstruation, proliferative, and secretory. And then we have two different phases of the ovary, so the follicular and the luteal. So if you want to skip to the next slide, I can show you a little bit more. This is my favorite graphic for the menstrual cycle ever. If you ever need to look up anything medically related, MedComic is where it's at. That's where I got this image. It helped me get through med school. So like I said earlier, we have both the ovarian and the uterine cycle. So we'll start with the ovarian cycle. That's up top. As it's telling us, we have low estrogen. Thank you. We have low estrogen. Our estrogen tank is on E. Our progesterone tank is also on E at this time. We have a signal coming from our brain called FSH. It's a follicle stimulating hormone. So that essentially causes us to create an egg in our ovary, and that starts to mature. That's where that little steaming guy has his estrogen coming off his head. That starts to create estrogen in the ovaries. Estrogen is very powerful, and in most women, we have an excess of estrogen because it comes in from our environment, from the birth control pill, from our diet, et cetera, et cetera. So that's when we end up with really painful periods. We end up with really heavy periods and a lot of other PMS symptoms I'll go into later. So we have estrogen cranking out from our ovaries here. And then we have another signal from our brain called LH, or luteinizing hormone, that when ovulation occurs, kicks that little egg out. It's mature enough, it kicks it out of the nest. And that's what he's spitting out here is a mature egg. And that egg is hoping to get fertilized by a sperm. So like Alyssa said, you can only get pregnant one day out of the month. And I don't think anybody teaches that because they want to scare you into thinking you can get pregnant literally any day of the month if you just look at a guy the wrong way. But I think it's really important to know what your fertility looks like and how and when you can get pregnant. And yes, we ovulate one day out of the month. That's when we can get pregnant, but a sperm lives up to 5 days. So that's where we get what's called a fertility window, because the ovulation occurs, that egg can survive for 24 hours. It gets kicked out of the ovary and starts floating through those little fallopian tubes. It can survive for 24 hours. But if a sperm comes in, that can survive for up to 5 days because they're strong and they really want to get to an egg to fertilize it. So we have that window, about 10 days maximum. I'd say 8 days is a reasonable amount of time to be planning for your fertility window. And ovulation is important regardless of if you want to get pregnant or not, because ovulation is what helps us create progesterone. So on the right-hand side of this little guy spitting out an egg, you can see progesterone starts to be created from what's called the corpus luteum. It's essentially the shell of that egg that was produced and not fertilized. And that shell of that egg, the corpus luteum, starts to produce progesterone, and that takes us through the end of the rest of our cycle. Progesterone, in comparison to estrogen, is a very calm hormone. It causes us to produce GABA, which is a neurotransmitter that chills us out. So if we have enough progesterone, the second half of our cycle, we should be very lovey-dovey, very chill, very calm. If we don't have enough progesterone, you become a raging biatch, for lack of better terms, because estrogen is going unopposed. Those two things have to be in balance for us to be able to have stable moods and for us to be able to get pregnant or know that we can't get pregnant. So after ovulation occurs, when we have this progesterone happening, we're in our luteal phase. So again, this is the ovarian cycle of things, which is really important. Regardless of if you want to get pregnant or not, you need to know whether you're ovulating, because that can help us either to get pregnant, which is when most people focus on ovulation, but it can also help you to not get pregnant if that is not in your goals. All of this changes if you are on the birth control pill. And I will go into birth control in more detail in a different class because I think it needs its own separate talk. But when you're on the birth control pill, you are not ovulating. You have synthetic hormones hijacking your uterus and your ovaries so they don't communicate with your brain. Therefore, you're not ovulating. So you can't get pregnant. It's the whole goal behind birth control, right? So these cycles only apply to women who are not on the birth control pill. And if you are on the pill, or if you're curious about it, don't worry, you'll get your whole own class where we will talk about, what's happening in your cycle then. But if you're off the pill, this is how we have fluctuations in our hormones. We have that estrogen in the first part of our cycle and the progesterone in the second half. The uterine cycle is the second part of these pieces moving together. So while we have all of this stuff happening with ovulation, we also have growth and shedding of the uterine lining. So at the very beginning, day 1 of your cycle, we have that bleed. We have the shedding of the uterine lining. And then from there, we start to build that back up through the proliferative and the secretory phases that we saw earlier. And if we don't have successful fertilization when we ovulate, we lose that inner tissue and therefore we bleed. My pathology teacher used to talk about it as preparing a room for a guest. You start putting out all the finest pillows and your nice sheets, and you hide all of the stuff you don't want them to see, and you make it look really nice. And then when they don't come, they call you last minute and they're like, nah, I can't come. You throw everything off the bed, you kick all the new sheets off, you get pissed, and everything gets thrown out of the room. That's essentially what's happening in your uterus when you decide to have a period because you didn't get pregnant. I don't know if that's helpful for you to remember it that way, but it definitely helps me to remember it that way. So these are the different phases of essentially why you have a period. The reason why you have a period, unfortunately, is to get pregnant. As humans, that is our goal. We want to get pregnant and pass our genes on to the next generation. So our bodies are super smart and they want to make that happen every single month, if possible. They want you to try and get pregnant. But like I said, if you're smart and you know where your body's at, you can really only get pregnant 1 day a month, plus or minus 5 days. So I think that's really empowering information to know, because pregnancy as a young female tends to be a very big fear. Melissa already hinted at that. That's something that a lot of women want to avoid, and we go on the birth control pill to avoid that. But what I find is the more information you know about your body, the closer you can kind of hone in on when you're ovulating and when you need to be careful should you choose to have sex with a male partner, because obviously that's when pregnancy can happen. So if you skip to the next slide, I'll talk about what happens around ovulation. So this is a more medically accurate image of what's happening during your cycle, but I don't think it's as fun. I think it's a little bit more confusing. But you'll see that it breaks it down into the ovarian cycle at the top. So like we talked about, you're growing that egg, you are maturing it, all of your hormones are working to do so. Then you kick it out, you try and ovulate it, and then the shell of that egg degrades and produces progesterone, your happy, calm, wonderful hormone. Right in the middle, around when you ovulate, testosterone spikes. Yes, you have testosterone. We tend to think of it as a male hormone, but it's really essential in females as well, because it helps to kick up our sex drive. Because obviously our bodies are smart, and if we're ovulating and our body wants to get us pregnant, we have to have sex. So testosterone spikes in hopes that we will have sex with a male and get pregnant. That's why those things are spiking then. But this gives us a lot of really great information about ourselves so we can tune in and know whether we're ovulating or not. So around ovulation, around day 14 of a normal 28-day cycle, you can start to experience pain on one side or the other, because your ovary is spitting out an egg and it can be a little bit painful. You can get some dull cramping. You can see changes in your skin. You can see changes in your mood. You might feel more attractive, more confident. Be looking in the mirror like, hey girl, what's up? Like, that's how you feel when you're ovulating, because it wants to improve your chances of getting pregnant. So if you're attracted to yourself, you feel good, your boobs are all perky, and you're like in a good mood, then obviously chances are going to be higher that you can get pregnant. So those are all things that can be happening around day 14, 15, whatever that looks like for your cycle. That can kind of clue us in as to if you're ovulating or not. And like I said in the beginning, I think this is important regardless of if you're trying to get pregnant, because it can also help us not get pregnant if we know these are happening. But it also tells us that we're producing progesterone, which is that calm, happy hormone that we really, really need to feel like a functioning human throughout the rest of our month. So I can't remember if I have another picture or not. Can you go for? Nope, go back. Sorry.
That's okay. You're good.
So I want to talk about what a normal cycle is supposed to look like. And then I feel like I've been talking forever, so I'll probably stop after that. So a normal cycle, which I hate the word normal because we're all very different. Our bodies aren't meant to operate the same as the person next to us. And there can be a lot of changes at the length and duration and flow and everything of a period in a cycle. But a typical cycle is 28 days long. That is just on average what it takes from day one of your bleeding until the next day one of your bleeding is 28 days. So if ovulation is happening halfway between that, we should theoretically be ovulating around day 14. But if you have a 30-day cycle or 31 or 32, then ovulation can start to happen, day 14, 15, 16. So that's when it's important to know your body in particular. And this is where tracking a period on an app can be really, really helpful. So I made a list on the previous slide of some period apps that I really like, but I think Clue is the most medically accurate one. They give you a ton of really great information if you subscribe to their stuff. That's the one I use, but honestly, the rest of them are great as well. And you don't have to pay for any of them unless you want to. Flow is another really great one. Period tracker. That one's probably the easiest to use. But even your Apple Watch or your Fitbit can track your period for you. So there's no excuse as to why you shouldn't. Even if you're on the birth control pill and you're not really having a traditional cycle or a traditional period, it's still really nice to be able to track symptoms throughout the month to get a good idea of how your body's responding to the pill and whether or not it's a good option for you to stay on it. So I have all of my patients track their cycle, track their periods. I think this is a really great indicator of your own health. Your period is kind of like a vital sign as a woman. It's like your heart rate, your blood pressure, your height, and your weight. Your period is as important to me as those other vital signs. So I like to think of your period as a report card from how you did the last month. If you ate really well, you drank your water, you meditated, you practiced stress reduction, whatever, you kept inflammation low throughout the month, your period the next month will probably be easy breezy, beautiful cover girl. Like the next month is going to be great. But if you ate sugar all month long, you drank a ton of alcohol, or you were super stressed out, you didn't sleep well, your period's not going to be great. Let's be honest. So the more that you can track your symptoms throughout the month, and you can even input in some of these apps like drank alcohol, ate a bunch of sweets, like stayed up all night, you can track things like that. So then you can see the next month, if you had cramps come out of nowhere, then you can look back and be like, oh yeah, that's where those came from. Because cramps and PMS and stuff like that is common, but it's not normal technically, and it's not really healthy to have really severe PMS. Your period should not be keeping you from going to work or school. You should not be laid up in bed all day. You shouldn't be calling it Shark Week. Like, your period shouldn't suck. And this is something I say all the time on Instagram, is like, your period shouldn't suck. Like, yeah, it might not be your favorite week of the month. You might not be like super psyched, but you should not be debilitated or laid up in bed or skipping work or school. that's when we need to start examining, what these other factors are that are making your period so terrible. And I saw a question in the chat, so I'm going to open that up. Okay, so the question says, does it mean anything if your cycle is longer or shorter than 28 days? I say a cycle that's between 25 and 35 days can be considered normal if you're having it regularly. So if your period is longer or shorter than 28 days, but it's always been like that, that's perfectly fine. Even, some people every 3 months, they have a shorter period. That's perfectly fine if you can find a pattern. If you're having very irregular cycles, so 1 month it's 40 days, another month it's 25, another one is 13, that's when we start to run into issues because your body's trying to navigate, like, where are my hormones at? Am I ovulating? What's happening here? Another thing to think about is your age. So when you first get your period, depending on how old you are, the first 3 to 5 years of your period can be really irregular. And that's shouldn't say unfortunately, why a lot of girls end up on the birth control pill is to help regulate their cycles, but it's completely normal and natural to have very irregular cycles the first couple of years that you start menstruating. If you're a little bit older and all of a sudden you just started having irregular cycles, so more than 28 days, less than 28 days, then, if that continues to happen, it might be something that needs to be addressed. I'm trying to think of what else I wanted to tell you guys.
I think another question came through. I don't know. Maybe it was just a thank you.
Okay.
Click on it, but I didn't know if it would pop up.
Is it impossible to get pregnant if you forgot your pill just one day? Everyone talks about it. I think that's kind of a scare tactic that's used. Like, oh my God, if you forget your pill, you could get pregnant. But it's not out of the realm of possibilities. If you are extremely fertile and your hormones are banging and you ovulate the one day that you forget to take your pill, you can absolutely get pregnant. Does that happen? Yes. But if you've been on the birth control pill for a long time, it's unlikely because the longer you're on the pill, the more likely your hormones have kind of shut down because they haven't had to work for a long time. The pill's been doing its thing. And the second you stop taking the pill, they're going to be like, well, what do we do now? And it's going to be hard for you to get pregnant, to be honest. But they say, it is pretty accurate that if you've only taken the pill for a month and you stop, you can absolutely get pregnant right away. There are tons and tons of women who now have been on the pill for decades, and they're finding when they come off, it's a little bit harder for them to get pregnant, which is really unfortunate. So I think that's a little bit half of a myth, but also half true, that you can get pregnant if you forget your pill for a day. But it just depends on how long you've been on it and how fertile, for lack of better terms, you were before you went on it. I hope that answers the question.
I have one kind of what you're saying too. So if you miss a period, usually they say you're pregnant, or also just having a late period. So is there I know sometimes people have said it could be from stress that you have a late period, but is it always an indication that you're pregnant, or could it just be something else going on?
Well, if you haven't had sex, then you can't be pregnant, even though we've all been there when we haven't even had sex in years or months. And we're like, oh my God, I'm 5 days late. I have a child. No, that's not how it is. But a late period can mean a lot of things. A late period can mean your weight got too low, because if you go below a certain body fat percentage, your body's not going to allow you to have a period. That happens a lot in high school girls, especially athletes, soccer players, volleyball players who are running and losing weight constantly. They have late periods all the time, not necessarily because they're pregnant. If you have some sort of hormonal imbalance, you can have a lot of fluctuations in your cycle, whether they're late or early. It's a really strange phenomenon, but if you're hanging out with a group of girls a lot, say you have a college roommate who's a girl, you can sync up cycles, because that's just how cool we are. We can send our uterus powers to the woman next to us and cause her to have her period 5 days The moon cycles can change when your periods come and go. Typically, human females are supposed to cycle with the moon. So we're supposed to either ovulate or menstruate on the full moon and vice versa at the new moon. So if you sync up to the moon cycle, that can change when your period comes. Um, Prescription medications can sometimes change that. There's a lot of reasons aside from pregnancy why you could be late. So my best advice to you if you're in that situation is to just calm down, as terrible as it seems. But the more you stress out, the longer your period's going to wait. We've all been there too. Because the second you start freaking out about your period being late, it's like, even later, like comes a week later. And that's just because your uterus is evil, I guess. Just wants to play tricks on you. But yeah, you can absolutely fluctuate and not be pregnant. There's plenty of other reasons. I kind of like got off track just reading questions, so sorry I went rogue. You'll find that I'm quite informal, as Alyssa said. I want this to be a casual conversation because I think we don't talk about this kind of stuff enough. We're all the owner of a uterus. We should have an operating manual. We should know how it works, how it doesn't work, what's normal versus not normal. So I want to talk about PMS a little bit, and then if you guys have any other questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. I say right here, PMS is common, not normal. So like I said earlier, if you are laid up on the couch for a week, you're like a wench snapping at your boyfriend to go get you chocolate ice cream and pickles or whatever the heck you're craving, like that is not a normal period. And while everyone talks about PMS, like, oh, I just have cramps. Oh, I just have raging acne. Oh, my back just hurts. Like, yes, those are common, but it shouldn't be like that. We're supposed to be able to have our periods and live a normal life. We're supposed to be able to have our periods and not be throwing huge clots in our blood, not become anemic because we're bleeding so much. Like, but these are all really common things. And there's a lot of reasons why they're common, but things in our environment are essentially what's driving it. What we eat on a daily basis, how well we're sleeping, if we consume a lot of inflammatory foods, if we're in a really high stress job or high stress life, these can all impact the comfort of your period, but so can your hormones. We all like to point the finger at our hormones, but your hormones don't necessarily get unbalanced for no reason. There tends to be a reason why estrogen is high or progesterone's low or what have you. So that's when a practitioner like myself can really come in and tease out those fine details and try and figure out like what in your life is making your hormones go crazy and why is your period so terrible. And how easy or how hard your period is just really gives you a great indicator of kind of where you're at with your health. Like I said, it's your report card. If your period is like pretty easy, smooth sailing, then you are doing a great job. And this isn't across the board. Like some women, yes, do have a lot harder periods because of endometriosis or fibroids or a condition like that. But then we can kind of ask, why are those conditions happening? What factors played a role into that person having fibroids or endometriosis or PCOS or whatever it is? Those don't happen for no reason as well. And unfortunately, they're just seen as like normal, common problems for women to have. And you just get the birth control pill slapped on you and regulates your period and you go on your merry way. But then when you come off the birth control pill decades later, you'll find that that problem never really went away. It just kind of had a Band-Aid over it. So sorry, I said I wouldn't get into birth control too much, but it's a big topic and it's something that we have no choice in a lot of times. We're like 14, 15, 16 and somebody's like, hey, do you want something to make your periods not awful, or do you want to get rid of that really embarrassing acne? And you're like, yeah, like I'll do anything. So you just say no, and your problem may go away, may not. But then, I want people to know there's other options, and we'll talk about those probably in a later class, like what the other options are. I also want people to know that your period is not necessarily supposed to be the worst week of your life. And there's a reason why you get your period. Um, we shouldn't be really happy if we're skipping a period. Like, I know they suck sometimes, and it's not always the best week ever, but we do need them, and we need to be having a period regularly. We need to be ovulating, and we need to be doing that rather pain-free to have a really healthy life as a female. And the more that you know about your period, the more information that you can gather about yourself throughout your cycle, the the better off you will be, because you'll be more educated about your own body, more empowered to stand up for yourself if you're at a doctor's visit and you feel uncomfortable with something, or just overall more empowered if you feel like something is wrong. Because I think that's really important. You have to be your own advocate for your health so that you can make the best decisions for yourself. And that's why having medically accurate sex ed in only 19 states is not okay, because we need to know these things about our bodies. Um, so I've been rambling on forever. If you guys have questions, you can either unmute yourself and ask them, or shoot them in the chat, or I'm going to make Alyssa ask me questions.
I do have a couple. Asked a few of them. No, you're totally right. And that's why I've gained a new passion. And I'm like, should I go back to school? But I was like, I'll just have Dr. Jenny speak for me. But I've become so passionate about it. And even just like, I feel bad for my friend group, because I'm just like, no, wait, like your period shouldn't hurt all the time. Like you should go look into it. Like I'm super passionate about it. I'm like, I'm not an expert. Like maybe reach out to a doctor. But like, I'm just so excited to be like, no, like let me diagnose you, because it's not just like, you're not crazy. It's not just like period pain. Like if that's a happening, you should be asking why, and like having the
Yes.
to figure it out, which is what
Ask why.
exactly. And like that's what I had to learn just in my own journey, and why I was led to you. And the first time I quit birth control, I didn't ask why enough. Like I was like, okay, whatever. And then I felt way better being off of it. And I did make that choice. But then going back on it, I just felt right away I started to fall back into like being depressive and being down, which, not trying to make birth control sound evil, because what anybody needs, if that's it, that's what works for you, it's totally okay. But I just think we're not always given the best resources to know how to make that decision and what's best for us. So we shouldn't just be given a band-aid. Like if you're having period pain or you have PCOS, like instead of just having birth control regulate it, maybe you take birth control, but like let's figure out why you have PCOS, not just put a band-aid over it.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to note that like birth control is amazing if you don't want to get pregnant. Like absolutely awesome at preventing pregnancy. And there's absolutely no shame in taking birth control. I was on the pill for 6 years, and then I was on an IUD, and now I do natural family planning and protected sex. So, you can go through a journey of what works best for you at the time, and you have to make that decision for yourself. But the only way you can make that decision is if you know all the options. And I think that's where the flaw is that most people aren't given all the options. So then they choose one and they get put through the cycle of like, this is what's best for you and this is what's going to work. But yeah, I mean, I think it's all about figuring out your own health, figuring out your own journey, where you're at with that, and deciding what's best for you at the time. So someone asked, is it possible to reset your cycle if on birth control? Is it harmful to skip the placebo pills? So it's absolutely possible to reset your cycle. What I'm assuming that you mean is making it more regular, or getting it to come more regularly, getting it to be less terrible. There's absolutely ways to do that. That involves figuring out what the underlying imbalance is, whether it's in your hormones or some other factor in your life, and being able to address that. If you are on the birth control pill, I know it sounds really enticing to only have 4 periods a month, or 4 periods a year. My bad. 4 periods a month would be awful. 4 periods a year or 3 periods a year. And I did that for a long time, and I definitely understand the appeal. And that's what happens when you skip the placebo pills. But you do still have some buildup of that lining of your uterus, even when you're on the birth control pill. And the longer that buildup of your uterus sits in there, the easier it is for you to get infections, or to have clots in your period, or to have really painful pill and you're not actually having a real period, which I guess I should have addressed that. But so I don't know if harmful is the right word to say skipping the placebo week, but I would typically not recommend it. I would say having your pill bleed once a month, having the placebo pills would at least keep the lining of your uterus a little bit more regular. Thinning it out is helpful. And that's what happens when we bleed is we thin out that lining, we get rid of that dead tissue. So I still think it's important. Um, Someone else asked, how does someone schedule a visit with me? Oh, so sweet. And do I take insurance? So, as a naturopathic doctor or a functional practitioner in the state of Michigan, I do not take insurance because honestly, the reimbursement would be like $20 for a 2-hour appointment. And I have to eat. I'm not greedy, but I do have to eat. So, we don't take insurance at our office. We do bill insurance for labs. And if you have an HSA or a flex spending account, you're absolutely welcome to use that on your visit costs and anything else. We try to keep things as affordable as possible. I understand I have a heart and a soul, and I don't want to make, accessible. I want to make my medicine accessible. So if you are looking to schedule a visit with myself, you can find me on Instagram at docjenb_nd. You can go there. There's a link in my bio. Or you can visit Michigan Center for Holistic Medicine, which I'll drop it below. And that's where I work. So you can schedule with me there. I am more than happy to do a little like discovery call with anyone for 15 minutes for free if you just want to get to know me better. If you want to go on a first date before you jump in, I totally get it. That's what that call is there for, because it is a little bit of an investment, but I think your health is totally worth it.
Other questions? I have one. It's a TMI one. I always like to ask the TMI.
Yes, TMI, bring it on.
I think it's going to be in one of our next classes, which I'll get to a last slide to show you guys what will be coming in the other classes or courses, whatever you want to call them. But is period poop a thing?
Oh my God, period poop. How did I not talk about that? Yes, girl. It is a real thing. Sorry, I'm just typing real quick, but I will come back to this.
No, yeah, because so really funny. So I quit my birth control back like a month and a half ago, maybe, you think now? And when you quit birth control, usually it takes time for your period to come back. And just in time for the period talk today, I started my period. And so I was just like thinking about that because I feel like I always get period poop. And like I always tell my boyfriend about it. And he's like, what? Like, why? Like, why are you doing it? And I'm like, it's a thing. It's happening.
Because if it wasn't bad enough that you're bleeding out of a hole, you have to shit yourself too. Like, come on, girl. But the reason why that happens, and some people tend to get a little bit constipated or a little bit backed up before their period because of a drop in estrogen, a drop in hormones, a drop in progesterone and estrogen at the same time. We're kind of like left without any hormones for a couple of days, and that's when your period starts. But then when estrogen starts to kick back up, it is inflammatory and causes prostaglandins to be made, which are an inflammatory molecule that just run things through your GI tract. They make it impossible to not have the period poops, essentially. So sometimes that can be a sign of a little bit of excess estrogen, or that's just could be your normal. Like, that's not necessarily a symptom of PMS, in my opinion. That's just kind of a thing that happens during your period because there's a decent amount of inflammation happening. And, why not just clear yourself out while you're also having your period? Like, yeah, it's kind of the worst, but it's totally a normal finding. Some things that aren't normal is passing large clots, like clots in your blood. If it's bigger than the size of a quarter, then you have an issue. If it's any weird colors, like bright red is okay. Dark red, almost brown is totally okay. But if it's more pink, like color of the slide, sorry, or gray or green or any very strange color, then you need to have a talk. If you take can it take can it something the chance to have babies in the future? Um, it can impact fertility. I kind of hinted at it earlier. Women who are on the birth control pill for decades and decades, like a lot of, our moms, our age group, our moms were on birth control for a while. But now, women that are growing up now are put on birth control even earlier in their life. And we are starting to see some changes in infertility. Infertility is incredibly common now, which is really, really unfortunate. But I don't think that's completely from the birth control pill. I think there's a ton of other factors. You can get off the birth control pill and the next day get pregnant, or you can get off the birth control pill and have what's called post birth control syndrome, where you kind of have to regulate things for a little while. And if we have a birth control talk, I will absolutely go into more detail on that. But taking the pill doesn't necessarily mean you will have you'll have any issues with fertility. It's not a, it's more correlation than causation, if that makes sense. It doesn't always happen. It does sometimes, but there's also a lot of other factors that go into it. This is sparkling water, I promise. But if anybody out there is drinking wine, drink some for me. I'm so proud of you.
As you say that,
I told somebody to bring wine.
I thought maybe you were drinking like an IPA or something. No.
No, girl. I only drink stouts.
I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I'm understanding is like taking the pill can like halt ovulation, but I'm curious about like other forms of birth control, such as like the copper IUD, because that's what I use. And I'm wondering if that has halted my ovulation, even though I know it's more, well, like it doesn't introduce like new hormones to the body, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So the IUD works a little bit differently than oral birth control, and the copper IUD works a little bit differently than the hormonal IUD. So obviously we'll get totally into the details on birth control during another class, but I want to answer your question. So the copper IUD can sometimes impact ovulation, but it creates thicker cervical mucus, so you can't have a sperm getting through the cervix, which prevents pregnancy in one way. And copper is actually spermicidal. So copper kills sperm because sperm contain a huge amount of zinc, and zinc and copper directly oppose each other, and sperm don't like copper, copper don't like sperm. So those are the two main ways that the copper IUD affects pregnancy. You can still get pregnant on the copper IUD, but it's a very low chance because of those two mechanisms. To my knowledge, it doesn't necessarily stop ovulation in most women, although it can happen. But the hormonal IUD does impact ovulation. Does that make sense? Okay.
Okay. If there are more questions, feel free to ask, but I did want to show that we plan to do a few more classes, as we did kind of touch on a few different topics and we said there would be more to come. So I think we are planning to do this monthly, but I guess we can talk offline. We want to do nutrition and women's health and body confidence, looking at that, birth control and hormone balancing. You guys probably have read this, other methods of birth control. We'll talk more about poop. And then, of course,
my favorite topic.
Then we'll talk about sex.
Also, yeah, that's my favorite topic, actually. I will put it out there that like the sex talk, maybe not appropriate for high schoolers. I know somebody was asking that on Instagram. Like, I think it's totally okay for high schoolers to learn about sex, but the way that I talk about sex might not be necessarily appropriate for high schoolers. But if you guys know of any high schoolers that are going to be joining, then just let me know and I'll keep it kosher. I won't play WAP in the background and I won't get too crazy.
Definitely. Yeah, I know I wanted to make this as inclusive for women as I could, but I know I think it's important for, young girls to learn about periods too, but I know parents can probably have some concerns about sex talk, but to be honest, I think it's important to know about your body and be empowered about it, because I don't think women should be shamed for being sex abused, because men aren't. So
No, standard. And I meant to say this earlier, but like way back in the day, women, when they were on their period, they were literally like exiled. Like nobody was allowed to talk to them. They just had to go bleed in a corner with the other girls that were bleeding, and like nobody would talk to them. So we have got a little bit of progress as far as like period acceptance and body acceptance, but we're still not there yet. Like guys don't get the amount of shame that women do for some of the things that their bodies do. And guys are gross. Like uh, I think if you know of anybody who needs this information, like obviously shoot them my way, or um, bring them to the next class. We are recording this so they can absolutely watch it. But your periods are really important. They're a super empowering piece of knowledge that you deserve to know about. And yeah, that's my spiel.
Okay, any more questions from anyone? I don't know where my thing went. I'm going to stop sharing actually, I think. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone joining. This was really exciting to do with PYM, and I'm really glad that we are becoming a platform that can share this information, because I think that's the most important thing is as women and even just as humans to have the knowledge to be empowered in the education. I think educating ourselves is empowering, whether it be for your bodies and periods or just in general, like to make better decisions towards your goals and dreams. And that's always what we're striving for here at PYM. So I appreciate everyone joining today. And yeah, stay tuned for more information on our next class with Dr. Jenny. And thank you for doing this, because I really appreciate it. And it really is a service to the female community.
I got you. I will talk about periods and poop and sex all day long. Like anything that's not an appropriate topic at dinner, like I'm game. So if you guys want to continue the conversation, you can always shoot me a DM, or like I said, we can do a little discussion and see if any of this sounds familiar. If you're having any hormonal issues, I'd be more than happy to help. But otherwise, I'm just happy to educate and appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Any last questions before I do close it, though? Everything's good?
Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Until next time.